You know, when you go to like a grand illusionist show, you sit in the audience, the house lights go down, and you see something that just completely breaks the laws of physics.
Right, like a person levitating or a massive car just vanishing.
Yeah, exactly. A 2-ton car disappears into thin air right in front of your eyes, and you're just dazzled. You are entirely sold on the magic because your brain is basically wired to believe the narrative the magician is feeding you.
And you believe it because you're only seeing exactly what that magician has engineered for you to see, you
Yeah.
know? The spotlight is very deliberately placed to guide your attention. And, maybe more importantly, the shadows are meticulously cultivated to hide the mechanics.
Right, the trap doors.
Yeah.
But if you were somehow, I don't know, allowed to walk past the bouncers, go backstage, and step behind that heavy velvet curtain while the show was actually happening, the reality is entirely different.
Oh, completely. It's not glamorous at all.
No. You wouldn't find magic. You'd see the trap doors. You'd see these intricate grinding pulley systems. You would see exhausted stagehands running around in the dark, sweating through their clothes.
Probably some frayed electrical wires held together with duct tape.
And sheer hope. Yeah. You realize very quickly that it's not magic at all. It's a massive, chaotic, and sometimes incredibly dangerous feat of engineering designed specifically to create a manufactured perception.
And if you stare at those trapdoors long enough and you watch those stagehands working in the dark, you start to ask questions not just about how the trick is done, but about the true cost of putting on the show night after night.
Well, welcome to the deep dive, because today we are taking you backstage on one of the greatest, most captivating, and undeniably most polarizing shows of the 21st century. We're looking at a stack of sources, and I mean a truly massive physical stack of documents covering the phenomenon of Elon Musk.
It is a vast array of material. I mean, we are synthesizing everything from deep investigative journalism and a university honors thesis to an official safety memo from the AFL-CIO labor union, plus book reviews and sweeping cultural critiques from publications like Current Affairs and The New Republic.
It's huge. But before we jump in, I want to be incredibly clear with you right out of the gate. Fair warning, these sources are highly polarized. We've got furious labor union memos sitting right next to, glowing write-ups from venture capitalists and tech founders.
It runs the entire ideological spectrum.
Right. So just so we are all on the exact same page, we aren't picking sides today. We are not here to endorse the viewpoints of these authors, nor are we here to condemn or praise the subject. Our mission is purely to impartially report on the content provided in these documents, explore the ideas contained within them, and try to piece together what this massive spectrum of opinions actually means.
And what's fascinating here is that the goal isn't really to litigate the man himself. We are using these materials to understand what the phenomenon tells us about our society, right? What does an astronomical rise like this tell us about how we, as a culture, value wealth?
Yeah, how do we define genius?
Exactly. And ultimately, what kind of future are we so desperate for that we're willing to buy into the illusion?
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even look at the electric cars rolling off the assembly line or the reusable rockets landing on drone ships, the sources tell us we have to look at the mythology that sells them. Why do we view tech billionaires the way we do?
Well, if we look at the Sunday Tribune piece by Nico Dubé, there's a really heavy, sustained critique of what the author calls the myth of the self-made genius.
Right, the lone guy in a garage.
Yeah, Dubé makes this highly compelling argument about the conflation of wealth with wisdom. In our contemporary world, there is this dangerous, almost subconscious tendency to assume that because someone has accumulated an unimaginable amount of capital, because they're the richest person on earth, they are inherently smarter or more visionary or just more capable than the rest of humanity.
We just default to thinking they're superhuman.
We do. And Dubé points out that this narrative requires a very specific, carefully curated origin story. With the humble beginnings, the relentless hard work against the establishment.
But the sources suggest that origin story, in this specific case anyway, is heavily sanitized. Like, it's missing a lot of context.
It really is. Dubé highlights the considerable privilege in the background here. He wasn't born into poverty or struggling circumstances. He was born into a wealthy family in South Africa.
Right, his dad was an electromechanical engineer and a property developer, I think.
Yes, and crucially, owned a half share of an emerald mine in Zambia. Now look, the point here isn't to say there wasn't incredibly hard work later in life or that there were no challenges.
Sure.
The point is that this initial wealth provided a massive, uncollapsible safety net.
Yeah, it changes the entire psychology of risk. I mean, if you're a kid starting a company in a garage and your parents are working class, failure means bankruptcy. It means ruin.
Complete ruin, yeah.
But if your family owns shares in an emerald mine, failure just means you try again. It allows for a level of aggressive risk-taking that is simply not available to the average person. But Dubé also brings up the role of luck, which is a concept we rarely like to attribute to billionaires, right? Because it shatters the meritocracy illusion.
Oh, absolutely. The right place at the right time factor is paramount. Dube notes that the tech industry is notoriously volatile. But the early successes with the first company Zip2 and then X.com, which eventually merged and became PayPal, that happened during the late 90s and early 2000s dot-com boom.
Oh, the wild west of the internet.
It was a unique historical window. It was a time when tech startups could flourish exponentially, and valuations were entirely divorced from traditional revenue models.
Right, you could just throw a .com at the end of your company name in 1999 and net millions in venture capital overnight.
Exactly. The macroeconomic conditions were basically creating millionaires out of thin air. Many brilliant entrepreneurs fail simply because of bad macroeconomic timing. So acknowledging that luck and timing played a massive role in those formative years dismantles the idea that the subsequent success is purely the result of an infallible intellect. It grounds the narrative back in reality.
I hear that, but I think we run the risk of downplaying the actual business acumen here if we aren't careful. I mean, we have another perspective in our stack, an article from Medium by Brett A. Hurt.
Right, the conscious capitalist perspective.
Yeah. Hurt is a six-time founder himself. He's a very successful guy, a Tesla owner, who looks at the situation and sees a genuine generational innovator. He's not just some hater sitting on the sidelines throwing stones. So is it really fair to just write it all off as a guy who got lucky with the dot-com bubble?
Hurt certainly doesn't think so, but even Hurt thinks our cultural framing of this figure is completely backwards. And he uses a brilliant analogy to explain this. He argues we shouldn't be comparing him to a James Bond villain or some lone wolf hero from an Ayn Rand novel like Howard Rourke, single-handedly bending the world to his will.
Okay, so what's the comparison?
He says the most accurate cinematic comparison is actually The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, I love this analogy so much because Hurt points out that at the climax of the movie, Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion finally get behind that curtain. Right.
Like they see the stagehand.
Yeah. Now, the great and powerful Oz is revealed to be just a guy pulling levers. Dorothy points at him and yells, "You're a very bad man." And the wizard looks back at her and responds, "No, my dear, I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard."
It's such a profound distinction, and Hurt applies it directly here. He argues that we're not necessarily looking at a bad man, and certainly not a bad entrepreneur, but a bad wizard. The public has fallen under the spell of wizardry. We've bought into this false mythology that a single, solitary genius is conjuring the future out of thin air.
And Hurt, coming from the tech world, knows better than anyone that entrepreneurial disruption is the ultimate team sport. I mean, to build a reusable rocket, you need metallurgists, fluid dynamic experts, software engineers, project managers.
Supply chain logistics experts.
Exactly. The CEO is the avatar for all of that. He's the public manifestation of a collective spirit of tens of thousands of brilliant people, including the early customers who took a risk on the vision. But the spell of the wizard makes us attribute the agonizing collective labor of the many to the innate genius of the one.
And pop culture is entirely complicit in maintaining this illusion. The Current Affairs interview with automotive expert Ed Niedermeyer points out how media eagerly, almost desperately, reinforces this narrative.
Which brings us to the Simpsons episode.
Yes. The Musk who fell to earth.
Such a perfect case study.
It really is. Because even when pop culture attempts to satirize the phenomenon, it often ends up flattering it immensely. In that episode, he's portrayed as a literal super genius inventor whose intellect is so vast and incomprehensible, it's almost alien.
He just walks around looking at things and invents revolutionary technologies on the spot.
Right. And furthermore, there are literal children's books written about him, praising his amazing life as if he's a modern-day Thomas Edison or a real-life Tony Stark. When a society is bombarded with these images from childhood through adulthood, it builds an aesthetic of inevitability around the person.
They cease to be a CEO and become a historical force of nature.
Exactly. And Dube's piece in the Sunday Tribune warns us about the real-world danger of treating CEOs like historical forces of nature. The cult of the wealthy genius isn't just a harmless fan club. If we as a society truly internalize the belief that the ultra-rich are operating on a higher moral and intellectual plane, the consequences are severe.
Well, first, it leads to a profound lack of empathy for everyone else, right? Because if wealth equals merit and extreme wealth equals extreme merit, then by that same logic, poverty must equal a total lack of merit.
That's the dark side of meritocracy. But perhaps more dangerously in the immediate term, it leads to a total breakdown of accountability for the billionaires themselves. If we view them as saviors of humanity, we are far more likely to excuse their unethical behavior.
We give them a free pass.
We do. Whether it's labor exploitation, safety violations, or environmental damage, society starts to view these transgressions as just the necessary messy cost of their genius. We think we simply aren't smart enough to question their methods.
And that transition from cultural mythology to real-world consequences is exactly where the sources take us next. Because if this genius myth is a spell, how is that spell monetized?
How does the wizard actually make his money?
Exactly. We are stepping out from the glow of the pop culture spotlight and looking at the cold, hard financial reality. Here's where it gets really interesting. In the current affairs piece, investigative journalist Ed Niedermeyer tells a story that I think perfectly encapsulates this gap between the myth and the reality.
The 2015 battery swap station.
Yes, the battery swap station.
This is a vital anecdote to understand the entire operational playbook. So, to set the stage, we have to remember what the EV market looked like back in 2015. One of the biggest hurdles to electric vehicle adoption was, and frankly still is, range anxiety and charging time.
Yeah, consumers were used to filling up a gas tank in 3 minutes. Sitting at a charger for 45 minutes was a total deal breaker.
Right, so a revolutionary solution was heavily hyped. A fully automated battery swap station. The pitch was incredible. You drive your car onto a platform, and in less time than it takes to pump a tank of gas, a robotic machine underneath your car unscrews your depleted battery, drops it out, slots in a fully charged one, and you drive off.
It sounds like a total game changer, and the claim was that it was all happening seamlessly, automated behind a curtain. But Niedermeyer actually drove out to the single location they built.
In the middle of California's Central Valley.
Yeah, specifically chosen on a busy Memorial Day weekend to see this revolutionary tech handling holiday traffic.
Yeah.
And what did he actually find?
He found a cow stockyard.
A cow stockyard.
Yes. The battery swap station was essentially a shed that was not open to the public. The company had claimed they were actively inviting people to use it, but when Niedermeyer looked around, there were long lines of incredibly frustrated drivers waiting at the standard superchargers right nearby, completely ignoring the supposedly revolutionary swap station.
But the punchline here is so much darker. Because it was a holiday weekend and demand was surging, Niedermeyer found that extra temporary superchargers had been shipped in to handle the overflow. And how are they powering these cutting-edge green energy superchargers in the middle of nowhere?
Diesel generators.
Diesel generators.
It is the absolute antithesis of zero-emissions technology. You have diesel generators puffing out black smoke to charge electric cars, while the highly publicized, supposedly revolutionary automated battery swap station sat completely unused in a shed next door.
When I read that, my first thought was just, why? I mean, why create this elaborate, expensive piece of theater if it doesn't actually work and no one can use it?
Well, the sources explained that it was almost entirely about regulatory subsidies. In California, the Air Resources Board has a zero-emission vehicle, or ZEV, mandate. Automakers have to earn a certain number of ZEV credits, or they face massive fines. Because the company only made electric cars, they had a massive surplus of these credits, which they sold to legacy automakers like Ford and Chrysler for pure profit. But here's the mechanism. The state awarded more credits to a vehicle if it could be refueled as fast as a gas car.
Oh, wow. So a standard charging station didn't qualify for the maximum credit, but a battery swap station did.
Precisely. By demonstrating this battery swap technology, even if it was basically a stage prop, they were able to capture significantly more subsidies per vehicle. It was a demonstration put on to satisfy a specific regulatory requirement for funding, not a scalable product meant for actual consumers to use.
That is wild.
And when Niedermeyer realized the sheer cynicism of that operation, he noted a crucial journalistic rule. When you flip on the kitchen light and see one cockroach scatter, there are usually hundreds more in the walls.
And it makes you wonder how the stock market responds to this kind of regulatory theater, right? Because the traditional textbook view of capitalism is that the market is rational. Wall Street analysts look at revenue, profit margins, operational efficiency, and they value the company based on those fundamentals.
Right, but this stock has historically completely defied all of those metrics. It trades like a tech startup, not an automaker.
Yeah, why is that?
That's because, as Niedermeyer argues, a tactic that is very common in Silicon Valley venture capital is taken and unleashed on the public retail markets. In the private VC world, investors often say they bet on the jockey, not the horse. They know the underlying technology might fail. They know the timelines are aggressive.
But they bet on a highly charismatic founder who can sell a massive, world-changing vision.
Exactly. VC investors are accredited. They are professionals. They are supposedly sophisticated enough to know they are being sold a highly optimistic, sometimes wildly inflated version of reality. In a way, they expect to be aggressively pitched to about the total addressable market.
Right, if you walk into Sequoia Capital and say, I'm going to capture 5% of the market, they'll laugh you out of the room. You have to say, I'm going to replace the entire concept of transportation.
Right. But the public market is fundamentally different.
Yeah.
When you take that same VC tactic selling a futuristic dream that hasn't materialized yet and bring it to retail investors, to regular people trading on their phones, to pension funds, they don't have the same level of sophistication or inside information to adjudicate the truth from the hype.
They buy into the narrative at face value.
They do.
The sources literally refer to this as the original meme stock, long before we ever saw the GameStop or AMC crazes. It created a financial environment where the perception of value actually becomes the literal value of the company.
It operates as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If a massive group of retail investors believes the company is the inevitable future of all global transportation and energy infrastructure, they buy the stock, and the stock price skyrockets.
And here is the crucial financial mechanism. When the company stumbles operationally, when they miss production targets by miles, or when they're burning cash and facing bankruptcy, the normal market forces that would punish a struggling company simply don't apply.
Because the narrative of inevitable future dominance is so strong.
Exactly. Investors just pour billions more into secondary stock offerings. The hike sustains the stock price, and the stock price provides the cash to keep the company alive. Therefore, extreme overpromising is financially rewarded.
The Current Affairs article boils this dynamic down into two incredible terms: actual machines versus fucking magic, or AM versus FM.
It is a brilliant framework.
It really is. Actual machines, the reality of automotive engineering is painfully slow. It's incredibly expensive. It involves constant compromises, trade-offs between weight and battery capacity, safety testing, and it's frankly often boring to the general public.
Yeah, watching someone test a suspension strut for 6 months is not exciting.
No. Fucking magic, on the other hand, is just a concept. It's a flashy CGI rendering. It's a bold promise fired off on social media at 2 in the morning. FM generates massive headlines and stock bumps. AM generates supply chain headaches.
It's like a company selling VIP tickets to a teleportation device and using that teleportation revenue to fund the research for a slightly faster bicycle.
That's a great way to put it.
You hype the literal impossible to finance the mundane. The best example of this in the sources is the Vegas Hyperloop. Do you remember this? A massive multi-city infrastructure project shooting passenger pods through vacuum tubes at 650 miles per hour.
Pitched as a totally frictionless sci-fi transit system that would render high-speed rail obsolete. The renderings were spectacular.
But we have to look at what actually got built beneath the Las Vegas Convention Center. The reality of Vegas is hilarious if it wasn't so deeply cynical. You were promised a 650-mile-an-hour vacuum tube, and what you actually get is a human being driving a regular car through a narrow neon-lit sewer pipe at about 35 miles an hour.
It's just a car in a small underground tunnel.
It's the ultimate bait and switch. But the FM, the magic of the Hyperloop concept, secured the contracts and the funding, even though the AM, the actual machine delivered, is incredibly underwhelming.
And this dynamic inevitably raises a comparison that comes up frequently in tech circles. Is this just another Theranos? Elizabeth Holmes went to federal prison for selling a blood testing machine that simply did not exist. She used FM to hide the total absence of AM.
Right, but the sources are very careful to make a distinction here.
Yes, they are. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a much more complex phenomenon. The paradox here is that genuine world-class innovation exists side by side with the deception.
Yeah, as Niedermeyer points out in his interview, Consumer Reports has given the vehicles phenomenal road test scores.
Automotive enthusiasts like Jay Leno praise the engineering. They have unequivocally shifted the entire legacy auto industry's timeline on electric vehicles. They build very fast, very impressive cars that people genuinely love to drive.
So it's not a mirage. You can walk outside right now and see 10 actual machines driving down the street.
The physical cars exist, yes, but the astronomical valuation of the company, making it worth more than the next several automakers combined, and the mythology of the CEO, are built almost entirely on the FM.
Right, the stock price isn't based on how many cars they sold last quarter.
No, it's based on the promises of fully autonomous robotaxis that will make you money while you sleep, of humanoid robots, of alien dreadnought factories that require zero human workers. The profound paradox is that the company couldn't survive without building the actual machines, but it also couldn't survive without the fucking magic that keeps the capital flowing in at a valuation completely disconnected from reality.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next layer of this investigation. What happens when the wizard's vision hits the assembly line? What is the reality for the actual workers tasked with building the actual machines while their boss is operating entirely in the realm of fucking magic? We have to look at the human cost of this vision.
To understand the factory floor, we first have to understand the psychological profile of the leadership. We look to the University of Connecticut honors thesis in our stack, which performed a deep analysis of this leadership style. The author uses an established academic framework called the 5 Practices of Exemplary Leadership.
And according to the thesis, he's an absolute master at one of these practices, but fails on an almost spectacular level at another.
Exactly. The thesis argues he excels at what's called authoritative leadership, which in this specific framework means he is incredible at inspiring a shared vision. He doesn't just ask employees to build a battery. He makes his workforce believe that they are literally saving humanity from climate change.
And at the aerospace company, they aren't just building rockets. They are ensuring the survival of the light of consciousness by making humanity a multiplanetary species.
That level of existential motivation is an incredibly powerful force. People will push themselves to the absolute brink of physical and mental exhaustion for a cause they truly believe in.
But the flip side is how the day-to-day execution of that vision is managed. The thesis notes he fails completely at enabling others to act.
Yes, despite having the capital to hire thousands of the most brilliant engineers on the planet, he describes his own style as a nanomanager. This goes far beyond traditional micromanaging. He has openly admitted to having severe OCD on product issues, wanting to control the tiniest, most microscopic details of engineering.
The thesis cites examples of this behavior, right? Like demanding weekly code printouts from engineers after acquiring a major social media platform.
Yeah, the code printouts.
Let's just pause on that for a second, because in modern software development, that is an absurd request. We aren't in the 1970s punching code into mainframes. Modern software is built in collaborative environments using version control, thousands of interlinking files.
It's highly complex object-oriented programming.
Yeah. Asking a software engineer to print their code on physical paper so you can eyeball it to see if they're a good coder is like asking an architect to show you a pile of bricks to prove they can design a skyscraper. It makes no sense.
It reveals a fundamental lack of trust in senior-level managers and a highly specialized workforce. It's performative management. He uses what the thesis calls a pace-setting style, setting extreme, often impossible standards like enforcing 80 to 100-hour work weeks.
Just brutal.
He operates under the personal belief that if he is sleeping on the factory floor and working 100 hours, everyone else must do the exact same, or they are betraying the mission. While this pace setting might extract incredible short-term results from highly motivated individuals during a crisis, the thesis concludes it is unsustainable.
It inevitably leads to severe employee burnout, high turnover, and most importantly, a toxic climate of fear.
And fear is the recurring theme that bleeds into every document in our stack.
Yeah. That culture of fear inside the factory doesn't just stay in the HR department. Once you realize the CEO is willing to push people to the brink over code printouts, you start to look at the physical safety of the assembly line in a much darker light. Which brings us to one of the most sobering documents we have, the AFL-CIO safety memo regarding the OSHA files.
This document fundamentally shifts the conversation. We are no longer talking about a demanding boss or a grueling work-life balance. We are talking about life and limb. We are talking about physical danger.
Right. And I want to frame this carefully because we hear about tough bosses in corporate America all the time, you know? Steve Jobs was notoriously difficult. Jeff Bezos is highly demanding. But this isn't just about a boss yelling at you because a spreadsheet is formatted wrong. This is about blood on the floor.
It is. The AFL-CIO memo details a staggering, deeply distressing list of severe safety violations across multiple companies. It paints a vivid picture of a corporate environment where the CEO's personal, idiosyncratic aesthetic preferences actively and routinely override standard, legally mandated industrial safety protocols.
I think the most baffling detail in the entire memo is the situation regarding the color yellow.
It is hard to comprehend, honestly.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about the culture. In any heavy industrial environment, yellow is the universal standardized color for caution.
Yeah, you see it everywhere in warehouses.
It is meant to be highly visible. It marks sheer edges, tripping hazards, and dangerous moving machinery. According to the investigative reporting cited in the union memo, the CEO personally dislikes the color yellow. He finds it aesthetically unpleasing.
So what did he do?
Well, at multiple facilities, there were numerous reports of yellow safety lines being ripped up or removed from the factory floor, or massive machines that came painted in high-visibility yellow safety paint being deliberately repainted blue or black to suit his personal aesthetic tastes.
That is just, I mean, wow. And it wasn't just visual warnings that were altered. The memo notes he reportedly didn't like the warning beeps that forklifts make when they are backing up. He found the noise annoying. So those auditory alarms were disabled.
Think about the sensory environment of an auto manufacturing plant. It is incredibly loud, chaotic, and visually overwhelming. There are sparks, moving parts, and hundreds of workers.
The loud, piercing auditory warning of a forklift backing up is specifically designed to cut through that noise and keep you from getting crushed by a multi-ton vehicle.
Exactly. And it was turned off because the boss found the sound irritating. That is the definition of prioritizing preference over human life.
And this culture of overriding safety for speed and aesthetics has led to horrific, irreversible consequences. The memo lists specific incidents that you can't just unread. Let's go through exactly what happened at the Gigafactory in Austin.
The Austin factory incidents are deeply tragic. A contracted, licensed electrician named Victor Joe Gomez Sr. was working at the facility. He was instructed to inspect electrical panels before they were energized. This involves a critical industrial safety procedure called lockout to goot, which ensures machines are completely powered down before anyone touches them.
It's the most basic safety rule for electricians.
Right. Tragically, one of the panels he was working on already had live power. He was immediately electrocuted with a massive voltage and died on site.
Oh my God. The memo also mentions a worker named Antelmo Ramirez, who died of extreme heat exposure while participating in the construction of that same Austin factory in the grueling Texas summer. The reports state he started acting disoriented, displayed seizure-like activity, and vomited before collapsing. And the reporting notes a disturbing detail. The company didn't even properly notify the correct regulatory officials about his death in a timely manner. And then there is the incident with the aluminum casting robot, which sounds like something out of a horror movie.
Yes, an engineer was working near an automated aluminum casting assembly robot. These machines are massive and are designed to handle freshly cast, searing hot car parts. Due to what appears to be a sensor failure or a breach in the safety perimeter, the robot did exactly what it was programmed to do, not registering a human was there.
Right.
It pinned the engineer and clawed into his back and arm. Witnesses described a terrifying scene, leaving a visible trail of blood on the factory floor as workers scrambled to hit the emergency stop.
And it's important to note this isn't just an issue isolated to the auto plants. The memo outlines severe incidents at his other companies as well. At the aerospace company, a worker named Lonnie LeBlanc was killed. He was tasked with transporting heavy foam insulation on a trailer. Because the supply chain or management hadn't provided the proper tie-down straps to secure the load, he felt pressured to get the job done anyway.
Pressure to perform.
Yeah. He climbed onto the trailer and tried to sit on the insulation to hold it down with his body weight. A gust of wind blew him and the cargo off the truck, and he died from head trauma. Another worker suffered a fractured skull and was in a coma for months after an automated engine venting sequence triggered while he was working near it, causing a part to shear off under immense pressure and strike him directly in the head. And over at the solar venture, another worker was shocked by 13,800 volts of electricity.
When you look at this accumulation of data points across different industries, automotive, aerospace, solar, a very clear, undeniable pattern emerges.
It's not just a few unfortunate accidents.
No. Which, to be fair, can happen in heavy manufacturing, despite best efforts. But this points to a systemic, top-down devaluation of worker safety in favor of breakneck speed, aesthetic control, and aggressive cost-cutting.
And the corporate response to these incidents seems to be a culture of impunity and deliberate obfuscation.
That's exactly what the investigative journalism from the Washington Post and Reveal News highlights in our stack. Reveal did a massive investigation and found that the company was actively cooking the books on their injury logs.
Okay, wait, how exactly do you cook an injury log? If someone breaks their arm, they broke their arm, right?
It involves intense pressure on internal medical clinics. By law, companies have to maintain an OSHA 300 log recording all workplace injuries. Reveal found that the medical personnel were pressured to classify severe workplace injuries as personal medical issues or minor first aid incidents,
Wow.
which kept them off the legally mandated government logs. By doing this, they artificially deflated their injury rates to make the factory look statistically safer than it actually was to regulators and the public.
And this defiance of public health and safety regulations wasn't just hitting in spreadsheets, it was broadcast on a global scale during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, yes.
When Alameda County in California issued mandatory stay-at-home public health orders to slow the spread of the virus in 2020, the CEO openly and aggressively defied them. He got on an earnings call and called the public health orders fascist. He unilaterally forced the plant to reopen, reportedly telling workers they'd lose their jobs or their unemployment benefits if they didn't show up to the line.
And the mechanism of that defiance had immediate consequences.
Oh.
According to public health documents, there were around 450 reported COVID-19 cases among the plant's workers in the months following that forced reopening.
The sources describe a culture of extreme, pervasive fear on the floor. Workers were reportedly warned by their managers not to even walk past his desk when he was visibly in a bad mood.
Lest they catch his eye and become the target of one of his spontaneous firing sprees.
Yeah, it creates an environment where nobody, not a line worker, not a safety manager, not a senior engineer, feels safe speaking up about a loose wire, a missing safety strap, or an overridden machine sensor.
If we connect this back to our very first discussion about the cult of the wealthy genius,
Yeah.
this right here is the real-world consequence.
Yeah.
When society, local regulators, and state governments view a CEO not as an employer, but as an untouchable visionary who is single-handedly building the future of humanity, they hesitate to enforce the rules.
They offer massive tax breaks. They look the other way on OSHA violations.
Exactly. They fold under pressure because they want the jobs and the prestige associated with the company's brand.
Yeah.
The narrative of genius creates a tangible, physical shield of impunity.
That culture of impunity inside the factory doesn't just stay behind closed doors, though. Once you realize the CEO is willing to turn off a forklift's backup alarm because he finds it annoying, you start to look at the incredibly complex software they are putting on public roads in a much darker light.
The autonomous driving.
Right. How does this culture of hype and impunity affect you and me, the consumers, and the pedestrians sharing the streets? Let's dive into the lethal consequences of hype and a concept the sources call auto-no washing.
This is perhaps the most urgent public safety issue raised in the entire stack of materials. To understand the gravity of the situation, we need to briefly establish the reality of the technology. We all generally know the difference between Level 2 driver assist, where the car can stay in a lane but you must have your hands on the wheel, and Level 5 true sci-fi autonomy, where a car has no steering wheel and you can sleep in the back.
Right. And no company currently has Level 5 technology available for consumer purchase.
None.
But the history of how this specific Level 2 system, branded as autopilot, came to be is fascinating and honestly a bit terrifying when you look at who had the tech first.
It really is.
The current affairs piece details a meeting back in 2013 between the CEO and the founders of Google, Larry Page, and Sergey Brin. Google, which eventually spun off Waymo, had actually been testing a highly advanced Level 2 system internally for years. But they shelved it. They refused to release it to the public. Why?
Because they ran up against human nature. Google's internal testing revealed a massive flaw, often called a handover problem. They found that when human beings are placed in a vehicle that does 99% of the driving perfectly, they inevitably, predictably stop paying attention.
Because it works so well.
Yes. The internal dash cam showed their test drivers putting on makeup, eating full meals, looking at their phones, and even falling completely asleep at the wheel. The engineers and lawyers at Google realized that this halfway point, where the car does almost all the work but requires a human to snap to attention for a split-second emergency, was fundamentally inherently unsafe.
So Google looked at the data and decided to wait, taking the slower, harder path to develop true, fully autonomous systems before releasing them. But the sources suggest the CEO was constantly looking for the next big tech wave to ride to keep the valuation inflated. He saw an opening.
Yes.
He looked at the exact same data, ignored the lawyers, ignored the aerospace safety experts warning about human distraction, and pushed his level 2 system out to the public anyway, brilliantly and deceptively branding it with the highly suggestive name Autopilot.
And this brings us to the psychology of what the sources call auto-no washing. It's a play on the term greenwashing. Auto-no washing is the deliberate act of marketing a rudimentary driver assist system in a way that tricks consumers into believing it is far more capable and autonomous than it actually is.
The behavioral psychology behind why this is so dangerous is wild. I want to use an analogy to explain what the brain is doing here. Driving a normal car requires constant active engagement. But monitoring a self-driving car is what human factors engineers call a vigilance task. It's like being asked to sit in a chair and stare at a red light for 20 hours straight, and you are told, at some random, unpredictable moment, that light might turn green. When it does, you've less than 1 second to press a button, or you die.
That is a flawless description of a vigilance task.
Evolutionarily, our brains are simply not equipped to do that. We are terrible at it. We get bored, we zone out, we look for stimulation on our phones.
Exactly. The cognitive experts in the sources emphasize that failing at a vigilance task doesn't make you a bad driver. It means you have a human brain. We are neurologically terrible at passively monitoring highly reliable systems that only fail once every 1,000 miles. When you call a system autopilot or full self-driving, and the CEO is constantly on social media posting videos saying the cars practically drive themselves and will soon appreciate in value as robotaxis, you are actively, deliberately inducing drivers to drop their vigilance.
And the tragic results of that induced complacency are heavily documented. The sources detail the agonizing deaths of prominent fans, people who truly, deeply trusted the claims. People like Walter Wong and Josh Brown.
Yes.
These were early adopters who were using the system, believed the car was successfully handling the environment, and were killed instantly when the system's cameras failed to recognize obstacles like a turning white tractor trailer against a bright sky, or a concrete highway barrier.
And what was the corporate response to these fatalities? They blamed the drivers. They publicly stated that the drivers chose to be distracted and failed to keep their hands on the wheel, pointing to the fine print buried in the user manual.
The fine print.
They legally covered themselves with warning screens while culturally and financially promoting the exact opposite behavior through marketing.
And we know that promotion wasn't just an accidental misunderstanding by the public. It was deliberate manufactured deception. Let's talk about the infamous 2016 promotional video.
This is truly a smoking gun in the narrative of deception.
Yeah.
In 2016, a slick, highly produced video was released, showing the vehicle driving itself seamlessly through suburban traffic, navigating complex intersections, stopping for pedestrians, and perfectly parallel parking. The video opened with a definitive title card that read, "The person in the driver's seat is only there for legal reasons. He is not doing anything. The car is driving itself." This specific video was used for years to sell software packages to customers for up to $10,000 a pop.
But thanks to later court testimony from engineers and investigative reporting, we now know the absolute truth about that video. It was completely staged. It was fucking magic.
It was entirely fabricated for marketing purposes. The route wasn't navigated dynamically by the car's AI. The route was pre-mapped in high-definition 3D by engineers specifically for the shoot.
So it wasn't even using the software they were selling.
No. They essentially hard-coded the steering angles. It wasn't reacting to the real world using the software available to consumers. It was running on invisible, pre-programmed train tracks.
And even with all that extensive preparation during the filming, the car reportedly crashed into a fence on their own property.
And the engineers testified that the human driver actually had to violently intervene and take control of the steering wheel roughly every 3.3 miles to prevent a catastrophic accident. They shot multiple takes, stitched the best parts together in the editing room to make it look like a single seamless drive, slapped on a title card explicitly claiming the car was driving itself, and used it to extract thousands of dollars from customers for a feature that functionally did not exist.
That is just incredible.
The word the investigative journalist Ed Niedermeyer uses for this is fraud. He argues that while there are gray areas in tech development, selling a Level 2 system as full self-driving, using staged videos, crosses the line into unambiguous, prosecutable deception.
And again, the impunity is just staggering, because despite the crashes, despite the tragic deaths, despite the ongoing investigations by the National Transportation Safety Board, they kept aggressively pushing the envelope.
Constantly pushing it, yes.
The sources highlight perhaps the most absurd, logic-defying example of this. At one point, a software update was pushed that allowed drivers to play video games like Solitaire and a jet fighter game on the massive center console screen while the car was in motion.
It defies every established principle of automotive safety. At a time when national traffic fatalities were rising sharply, primarily due to smartphone-distracted driving, an automaker intentionally introduced a highly engaging, interactive distraction right next to the steering wheel.
It wasn't an accident.
No, it was a UI/UX feature they designed and deployed. It is a glaring symptom of a corporate culture that simply does not recognize regulatory boundaries or conventional safety norms, driven entirely by a CEO who views any restriction as a personal obstacle to his vision.
So we have to ask the ultimate question. If the cars are built in factories with horrific safety records and cooked injury logs, and the self-driving tech is essentially a deadly beta test happening on public roads with unconsenting pedestrians,
Hmm.
what is the end game? What is the world this wizard is actually trying to build?
This is where we get into the final exploration.
Right. We are moving to Muskism and the profoundly bleak capitalist futurist vision.
To understand the end game, we look to the Guardian's review of the book Muskism by Quinn Slobodian and Ben Tarnoff. They argue that this isn't just about selling electric cars or reusable rockets. It is an attempt to install a brand new operating system for the 21st century global economy.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, in the 20th century, we had Fordism, a system pioneered by Henry Ford. Fordism relied on mass production combined with mass consumption. The core idea was that you pay your factory workers a high enough wage that they can actually afford to buy the cars they are building.
Thereby creating a robust middle class that sustains the economy.
Exactly.
And Muskism. How does the 21st century operating system differ?
Muskism is fundamentally different and far more exclusionary. It doesn't aim for the broad distribution of wealth or the uplifting of a middle class. Its central seductive promise is sovereignty through technology.
Sovereignty through technology.
Yes. It sells the fantasy that in a chaotic, crumbling, climate-ravaged world, you don't need to fix the government or society. You can simply buy your way into safety and self-reliance by plugging into this proprietary ecosystem. Buy the solar panels and power walls to get off the failing electric grid. Buy the electric car to avoid geopolitical gas price spikes. And eventually, buy a ticket on the rocket to escape the dying planet entirely.
But the Guardian Review points out the incredible dark irony here. He's selling you rugged individualism and self-reliance, but what he's actually delivering is total, absolute reliance on him. He is building monopolistic choke points.
Precisely. Look at the aerospace side. It currently has a near 95% monopoly on U.S. orbital launches. NASA, the Pentagon, and the entire U.S. government are utterly, helplessly dependent on a single private company controlled by a highly erratic, unaccountable CEO.
We saw the terrifying reality of this reliance play out geopolitically with the satellite system in Ukraine.
We did. A single private citizen sitting in a boardroom suddenly had the unilateral power to dictate battlefield communications in a sovereign nation's war for survival, turning access on and off based on his own political whims and social media polls.
The worldview underlying this desire for total control is what the authors call the code worldview. It's fascinating, but it's also deeply chilling. The entire physical and social world is viewed not as a complex web of human relationships, but as a literal computer program.
Yes. And if society is just a program, then human empathy, as the CEO has literally posted online, is an exploit.
Wait, empathy is an exploit?
Yes, a vulnerability in the code that weakness can use to hack the system and slow down progress. He views society as corrupted code.
Yeah.
And in software engineering, when a variable isn't contributing to efficiency, you simply highlight it and delete it. You don't negotiate with it.
We saw this exact philosophy in action during his proposed stint leading a conceptual Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
Exactly. He approaches complex, messy, vital human systems like government agencies that support millions of vulnerable lives through welfare or healthcare, as if they are just bloated software architectures waiting to be ruthlessly debugged and deleted to save processing power.
Nathan J. Robinson's piece in Current Affairs takes this analysis even further, looking at what this specific code worldview means for our physical built environment. Like, why does he have such a well-documented, visceral hatred of public transit?
Because public transit is inherently democratic, and it forces you to interact with the messy unpredictability of other human beings. He has explicitly stated his disdain for it, complaining that on a bus or a subway train, you are surrounded by random strangers. And to quote him directly, one of those strangers might be a serial killer.
Which is such a profoundly paranoid, isolated way to view human society.
It is entirely devoid of civic trust. His solution to urban traffic congestion isn't to build robust, beautiful public infrastructure that benefits everyone in the city. His solution is to dig individualized, hyper-expensive tunnels where the wealthy can shoot past the congestion in their private pods. It's a complete withdrawal from the public sphere into fortified, private enclaves.
And nothing symbolizes that fortified, paranoid enclave better than the physical design of the Cybertruck.
Oh, absolutely.
Robinson points this out brilliantly. When you look at old concept cars from the 1950s and 60s, they look sleek, aerodynamic, and optimistic, like beautiful spaceships taking us to a utopian tomorrow. The Cybertruck doesn't look like utopia.
No, it looks like a vehicle designed for a dystopian wasteland. It looks brutalist. It's designed with unpainted, bullet-resistant stainless steel and armored glass, which, ironically, famously shattered during the live stage demonstration.
Right. But the aesthetic and psychological intention is crystal clear. The future is not something we build together in harmony. The future is a violent, resource-scarce Mad Max scenario where you need a personal, bulletproof tank just to survive your commute to the grocery store.
It assumes the total collapse of social trust and the triumph of the warlord.
And if Earth collapses entirely, well, there's always Mars. But even his grand vision for colonizing Mars is incredibly dark when you strip away the soaring CGI graphics and the sci-fi romance. It's not Carl Sagan's vision of a humanistic scientific exploration united in wonder and discovery.
He has stated repeatedly that a primary reason for pushing so hard to go to Mars is to have an escape hatch for the continuation of consciousness when, and he uses the word when, not if humanity inevitably destroys itself in World War III.
He views apocalypse not as a possibility to be avoided, but as an inevitability to be managed.
Exactly.
And who exactly gets to go to this multiplanetary escape hatch? Because it's not going to be a lottery.
That's the most disturbing part of the vision. Because the journey will be immensely expensive, he has publicly suggested a system where people who can't afford the millions of dollars for a ticket can take on loans to go.
Okay, loans.
And then pay off that massive debt through manual labor once they arrive on the Martian colony.
He is quite literally proposing indentured servitude in space, a corporate-owned planet where you are legally bound to work off your travel debt to the company store in a dome where they control the oxygen.
Yes, the labor laws, environmental protections, and democratic constitutions of Earth won't apply. He envisions a total corporate jurisdiction where the CEO is the ultimate sovereign. It's a direct return to the most brutal 19th century robber baron capitalism, just relocated to a different planet with a cooler backdrop.
This raises a profoundly important question, and it brings us to one of the most poetic ironies in this entire deep dive. Expert speaker, let's look at the final source in our stack, the New Republic review of the film Tesla. We need to talk about the real historical Nikola Tesla.
This raises an important question, yes. This is a crucial historical parallel that ties everything together. The real Nikola Tesla, the brilliant Serbian-American inventor the man named his massive car company after, was a true utopian dreamer.
Yeah.
He genuinely wanted to invent technologies that would provide wireless free energy to the globe and lift humanity out of poverty. He was motivated entirely by the work, by the science, and by a love for humanity, not by the accumulation of personal wealth.
And what actually happened to the real Nikola Tesla?
He was utterly crushed by the capitalist machinery of his era. Specifically, he was financially ruined by the billionaire financier J.P. Morgan. Morgan initially funded Tesla's early work on the Wardenclyffe Tower. But when Morgan realized that Tesla's dream of wireless free energy couldn't be easily metered, controlled, and monetized, Morgan abruptly cut off all the funding.
Wow.
Morgan saw genius merely as a commodity to be exploited for personal monopoly and profit. Tesla, unable to secure further funding because Morgan blacklisted him, died alone and penniless in a New York hotel room.
So, the profound, almost tragic irony here at the end of our journey. This modern CEO took the name of the exploited, utopian, impoverished genius to brand his empire. But when you look at his actual actions, his ruthless accumulation of hundreds of billions in wealth, his treatment of labor, his blatant union busting, his demand for total nano-managed control, and his vision of a privatized, corporate-owned future.
He doesn't resemble Nikola Tesla in the slightest.
Not at all.
He aligns almost entirely, flawlessly with J.P. Morgan. He's become the very archetype of the techno-robber baron that destroyed the man his company is named after. He took Tesla's name, and apply JP Morgan's operating system.
Okay, let's unpack everything we've just gone through because it is a massive amount of information. We started by peeling back the velvet curtain on the Wizard of Oz myth, realizing that the culturally dominant narrative of the lone, self-made genius is heavily subsidized by inherited privilege, incredibly good macroeconomic timing, and the unrecognized grueling labor of thousands of engineers.
Right, and we then examined the transition from venture capital hype to public market reality, exploring how the illusion of fucking magic is used to inflate stock valuations to astronomical heights, often at the direct expense of the actual machines. We saw the Theranos-like deception surrounding the staged battery swap stations and the bait and switch of the Vegas Hyperloop.
We then took a hard look at the horrific human cost on the factory floor. We explored a nano-managing leadership style that demands 100-hour work writs, ignores basic life-saving safety protocols because the CEO hates the color yellow and the sound of backup alarms, and results in severe injuries and tragic deaths, all covered up by a culture of fear and cooked injury logs.
We moved out of the factory and onto the public roads, dissecting the lethal psychology of auto washing. We saw how deliberately selling a level 2 driver assist system as full self-driving, using staged fraudulent marketing videos, has led to consumers dropping their vigilance and trusting their lives to beta software with fatal, irreversible results.
And finally, we explored the ultimate endgame of Muskism. A bleak, dystopian worldview where human empathy is viewed as a software bug, public transit is for serial killers, the rich retreat from society in armored brutalist tanks, and the ultimate salvation for humanity is an indentured servitude colony on a corporate-owned Mars.
It is a comprehensive, multifaceted picture of a modern industrial empire built on a foundation of profound contradictions, extreme brilliance, and staggering human cost.
So what does this all mean for you? The next time you are scrolling your feed and you see a massive headline about a billionaire promising to save the world with a magic new brain microchip or a subterranean tunnel or utopian mission to the stars, remember to look backstage. Remember to look at the workers on the factory floor getting crushed by robots. Look at the fine print on the autonomous driving technology. And look at the diesel generators sitting in the dirt, powering the illusion of a green future.
The sources urge us to demand a humanist vision for our collective future, a future built on strong public institutions, civic trust, and democratic governance, rather than relying on the whims and the unyielding control of a single, unaccountable CEO.
Which leads me to one final, deeply provocative thought for you to chew on. We've established that the philosophy of Muskism views society as corrupted code and individual human beings as variables that can simply be deleted in the pursuit of absolute unfeeling efficiency. Right now, this exact same figure is pouring billions of dollars into the race to develop artificial general intelligence.
Oh, right.
If he succeeds, and that superintelligent AI adopts its creator's exact same leadership philosophy and total lack of empathy toward humanity, what happens to us?
It's a chilling question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, keep digging into the sources, and never forget that when the magician is dazzling you with his right hand, you always need to watch what the left hand is doing in the dark.